Of Hollow Creek, Kentucky, the Caldwell family had always kept to themselves. Deep in the Appalachian foothills, their sprawling farmhouse was nestled, sitting at the end of a winding dirt road and almost entirely obscured by ancient oak trees that stood guard like silent sentinels. Rarely did locals venture there, and those who did spoke in hushed tones about the strange happenings at the Caldwell property. It was in the summer of 1947 that a young journalist named Thomas Reed arrived in Hollow Creek. Fresh out of college and eager to make a name for himself at the Louisville Courier-Journal, Thomas had heard whispers about the Caldwell family while covering a story on coal mining disputes in eastern Kentucky. Of a family that hadn't aged in decades, there were rumors. Of children who remained children for far too long, of a patriarch who should have been long dead but still tended his fields with the vigor of a man half his age. As backward superstition, most dismissed these tales, the kind of folklore that flourished in isolated mountain communities. But Thomas Reed was different. A story he saw, perhaps the story that would launch his career. The dashboard clock of Thomas's 1939 Ford Coupe read for 17 p.m. as he pulled onto the dirt road leading to the Caldwell farm. Through the dense canopy of trees, the late afternoon sun filtered, casting dappled shadows across the windshield. To static, the radio faded as he ventured deeper into the hollow. Beneath the crackle of interference, Perry Ko's smooth voice eventually disappeared altogether. The radio Thomas switched off and rolled down his window. Oppressive was the summer heat, the air thick with humidity and the scent of honeysuckle. In the trees, cicadas droned, their rhythmic buzzing the only sound apart from the crunch of tires on gravel and the occasional clink of his camera equipment shifting in the passenger seat. As the road curved sharply to the right, into view came the Caldwell farmhouse. To a crawl, Thomas slowed the car, taking in the sight before him. Well-maintained was the two-story structure, but clearly old, its white paint yellowed with age. Around the front, a wide porch wrapped, complete with rocking chairs and hanging plants. Despite the summer heat, smoke curled lazily from a stone chimney. What caught Thomas's attention, however, was the family gathered on the porch. From a distance, they appeared perfectly ordinary. A man and woman, perhaps in their 40s, and 3 children of varying ages. The man was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in overalls and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. A floral print dress the woman wore, her dark hair pulled back in a simple bun. The children, 2 boys and a girl, were playing some kind of game that involved jumping between the porch steps. Beneath an oak tree, Thomas parked his car and retrieved his notepad and camera from the passenger seat. As he approached the house, the family ceased their activities and turned to watch him, their expressions unreadable from a distance. In the sudden stillness, the cicadas seemed to grow louder. "Afternoon," Thomas called out, raising a hand in greeting as he reached the bottom of the porch steps. Thomas Reed is the name, from the Louisville Courier-Journal. The man on the porch nodded slowly but didn't speak. Up close, Thomas could see that he was older than he'd initially appeared. Perhaps in his late 50s rather than 40s, with deep lines around his eyes and salt and pepper hair. About those eyes, there was something strange, Thomas thought. They seemed to hold knowledge far beyond the man's years. "I was hoping I might have a word with you, Mr. Caldwell," Thomas continued, suddenly uncertain. "About your family." "Joseph Caldwell," the man said finally, his voice deep and resonant. "And what exactly is it you want to know about my family, Mr. Reed?" Thomas hesitated. He couldn't very well blurt out that he'd come to investigate rumors of supernatural longevity. "A piece on traditional farming families in Kentucky, I'm writing," he lied smoothly. "Folks who've kept to the old ways despite all the changes since the war. I heard the Caldwells have been working this land for generations." Impassive remained Joseph Caldwell's expression. But the woman, presumably Mrs. Caldwell, stepped forward. In a timeless way she was beautiful, with high cheekbones and clear, intelligent eyes. "We don't much care for having our business in the papers," she said, her voice soft but firm, especially not when reporters come with stories already half-written in their heads. Up his neck, Thomas felt a flush creep. "I assure you, things about us, you've heard," she interrupted. "That's why you're here, not for some article about farming." They're playing entirely now. The children had stopped and stood clustered behind their parents. At Thomas, the oldest boy, who looked about 12, stared with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Behind cupped hands, the younger boy and the little girl, perhaps 8 and 6, respectively, whispered to each other. Heavily, Joseph Caldwell sighed. "Eleanor," he said to his wife, "perhaps we should hear the man out." He turned to Thomas. "You might as well come inside, Mr. Reed. Seems like we have things to discuss." Thomas followed the family into the farmhouse, the screen door creaking shut behind him. Cooler than outside was the interior, but still warm, with hardwood floors that gleamed in the late afternoon sunlight streaming through lace-curtained windows. Simple but well-crafted were the furnishings: a large oak dining table with matching chairs, a sideboard laden with blue and white china, a grandfather clock ticking solemnly in the corner. For Thomas to sit at the table, Eleanor Caldwell gestured while she moved to the stove where a kettle was beginning to whistle. "Tea, Mr. Reed?" she asked, her tone making it clear that refusal would be impolite. "Yes. Thank you." Thomas set his notepad on the table, but left his camera strap looped around his neck. In the doorway, he noticed the children hovering, watching him with undisguised curiosity. "And who might you three be?" he asked, attempting to break the tension. The oldest boy stepped forward, shoulders squared. "Samuel, he said. "This is my brother James and my sister Margaret." The younger children nodded in acknowledgement, but remained silent. Across from Thomas, Joseph Caldwell took a seat, folding his weathered hands on the tabletop. "Now then, Mr. Reed, why don't you tell us what you've heard about our family that's brought you all the way out here to Hollow Creek?" Thomas cleared his throat. "Well, sir, there's talk in town about the Caldwells. They say you've been here longer than anyone can remember, but you never seem to change." Before Thomas, Eleanor placed a cup of tea, the china clinking softly against the saucer. "Sugar?" she asked. "No, thank you, Thomas took a sip, the tea scalding hot and bitter. "They say the children have been children for longer than is natural." A noise that might have been a suppressed laugh, Samuel made. A warning glance his father shot him. "People talk," Joseph said simply. "Especially in small towns where there's little else to do." "No truth to it, then?" Thomas pressed. "Because I've spoken to folks who claim their grandparents knew your family, and they say you looked exactly the same then as you do now." Beside her husband, Eleanor took a seat, her posture rigid. "Mr. Reed, may I ask what year you were born?" The question caught Thomas off guard. 1925, he answered. "So you're 22, she said. "Young to be chasing fairy tales across the state." "With all due respect, Mrs. Caldwell, I'm not chasing fairy tales. I'm investigating an unusual story that could be of significant scientific interest if there's any truth to it." A look that Thomas couldn't interpret, Joseph and Eleanor exchanged. In the silence that followed, the grandfather clock in the corner ticked loudly. "What if," Joseph said finally, "there was some truth to what you've heard? What would you do with that information, Mr. Reed?" Eagerly, Thomas leaned forward. "Write about it, I would, of course. It could be the medical discovery of the century. Think of the implications if whatever affects your family could be studied." "Understood." "Studied?" Eleanor interrupted, her voice suddenly cold. "Like specimens in a laboratory?" "No, that's not what It's exactly what you mean," she said. "You'd have doctors and scientists descending on our home, disrupting our lives, treating us like curiosities rather than people." His journalistic instincts sharpening, Thomas felt. They weren't denying it. "So, it is true," he said quietly. "You don't age." Impassive remained Joseph Caldwell's face, but something flickered in his eyes. Resignation, perhaps, or a deep weariness. "Mr. Reed, we've lived in peace here for a very long time. We've harmed no one. All we ask is to be left alone." "But this could benefit all of humanity," Thomas argued. "If scientists could understand why you don't age." "You assume we don't know why," Joseph said. Staring at him, Thomas was momentarily speechless. You know what causes it?" Instead of answering, Joseph turned to his children. "Samuel, take your brother and sister outside. Go check on the chickens." "But Pa," Samuel began to protest. "Now, son." Reluctantly, the children filed out, the screen door slamming behind them. Rising, Eleanor moved to the window, watching them cross the yard. "Mr. Reed," Joseph said once the children were out of earshot, "what I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room." "Understood." Eagerly, Thomas nodded, reaching for his notepad. "No," Joseph said firmly. "No notes, no story. This is for your ears only, and only so you understand why you need to leave us be." Reluctantly, Thomas set his pencil down. "All right, Mr. Caldwell, I'm listening." A deep breath Joseph took. "In 1817, my father, Jeremiah Caldwell, settled this land. He was a doctor, trained in Philadelphia, but disillusioned with city life. He came here with my mother looking to start fresh, to help the mountain folk who had little access to medical care." 1817. Thomas interrupted. "But that would make you." "In 1842, I was born," Joseph said matter-of-factly. "I'm 105 years old, Mr. Reed." A chill Thomas felt despite the summer heat. If what Caldwell was saying was true, and he had no reason to think the man was lying, he was sitting across from someone who had lived through the Civil War, who had been an adult when Abraham Lincoln was president. "A good doctor, my father was," Joseph continued. "But he was also a scientist at heart, always experimenting, always searching for ways to improve human life. He became obsessed with the idea of extending life, of conquering death itself." He paused, his gaze distant. "In 1857, he believed he'd found something, a combination of local plants and minerals that, when processed a certain way, created what he called the elixir." To the table, Eleanor returned, placing a hand on her husband's shoulder. "Joseph, are you certain about this?" He covered her hand with his own. "He needs to understand, Eleanor. It's the only way." Reluctantly, she nodded and sat down again. "On himself first, my father tested the elixir," Joseph said. "When he showed no ill effects, he gave it to my mother, to me, and to my younger sister, Rebecca. Anything unusual at first, we didn't notice. But as the years passed, it became clear that something had changed within us. By 1870, when I should have been showing signs of aging, I still looked like a man of 28. My father appeared no older than he had the day he first took the elixir." "And you haven't aged since?" Thomas asked, struggling to accept what he was hearing. "We age," Eleanor corrected. "But very, very slowly. Perhaps 1 year for every 15 or 20 that pass." "In 1889, Eleanor came to us," Joseph explained. "She was the local school teacher, new to the area. We fell in love and eventually I trusted her with our secret. She chose to take the elixir as well." "And your children?" Thomas asked. Another look Joseph and Eleanor exchanged. "As normal children, they were born," Eleanor said carefully. "But they inherited the effects. They age normally until around 12 years old and then it slows dramatically." "So, how old are they really?" Thomas couldn't help asking. "In 1901, Samuel was born," Joseph said. "He's 46. James is 72. And Margaret." He paused, a shadow crossing his face. "Our youngest is Margaret, born in 1926. She's the only one who appears close to her actual age." With questions, Thomas's mind reeled. "But how have you kept this secret for so long? Surely people would notice that you don't age." "We move," Eleanor explained. "Every 20 years or so, we sell the property, change our names, and relocate to another isolated area. Then, after a generation has passed, we sometimes circle back. Short is human memory, Mr. Reed. Few people live in the same place their entire lives anymore. Those who do are often willing to dismiss what they see as impossible. But you said your father discovered this in 1857, Thomas pressed. That's 90 years ago. Why hasn't he published his findings? Why keep something so monumental a secret? Darkened Joseph's expression. My father did try to share his discovery once. In 1863, during the Civil War, he approached the Union Army, believing the elixir might help save wounded soldiers. He was naive. A medical miracle, they didn't see. A military advantage, they saw. They seized his notes, detained him for questioning, tried to force him to produce more elixir. What happened? He escaped, Joseph said simply. Returned home and destroyed all written record of his work. He vowed never to share the formula again and made us promise the same. Where is he now? Thomas asked. Your father? Dead, Eleanor answered before Joseph could speak. Some things the elixir cannot prevent. Disease still affects us. Jeremiah Caldwell died of tuberculosis in 1892. Back in his chair, Thomas sat, overwhelmed by what he was hearing. If it was true, and despite the fantastical nature of the tale, he was inclined to believe the Caldwells, he was sitting on the biggest story of the century, perhaps the biggest story ever. Mr. Reed, Joseph said, reading his thoughts, you gave me your word that this conversation would remain private. But Mr. Caldwell, surely you see the potential benefit to mankind. If doctors could study your condition, replicate the elixir. No. Final was Joseph's tone. I've seen what men do with power, Mr. Reed. I lived through the Civil War. I saw the trenches of France in the Great War. I watched as man split the atom and unleashed hell on earth in Japan just 2 years ago. Imagine what they would do with the power to extend life indefinitely. Not everyone would misuse it, Thomas argued. Think of the diseases that could be cured, the suffering that could be prevented. And think of the suffering that could be caused, Eleanor countered. A world where only the wealthy and powerful live for centuries while the rest age and die as nature intended. A world of increasing inequality, of resources strained beyond capacity by populations that never diminish. To that, Thomas had no immediate response. The ethical implications were indeed staggering. More, there is, Joseph said quietly. The elixir comes with a price. We may not age, but we still feel the passage of time. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch everyone you know grow old and die, generation after generation? To form friendships, knowing they're fleeting from your perspective? To live in constant fear of discovery? A lonely existence it is, Mr. Reed. One I would not wish on others, Eleanor added softly. Through the open window, the sound of children's laughter drifted in. The Caldwell children were returning from their chores. Except they weren't children, Thomas reminded himself. Samuel was older than he was. James was old enough to be his grandfather. Only Margaret was truly a child. What happens to them? Thomas asked. Your children, will they live like this forever, moving from place to place, watching the world change around them while they remain the same? Each other, they have, Joseph said, though a hint of doubt crept into his voice. And they have us. Not the life we would have chosen for them it is, but the only one we can give them now. At his untouched notepad, Thomas looked down, at the camera hanging around his neck. The story of a lifetime was sitting right in front of him. Proof of near immortality, a medical miracle hidden away in the Kentucky hills. His editor would promote him on the spot. His name would be known nationwide. And for the rest of their unnaturally long lives, the Caldwells would be hounded relentlessly. Mr. Caldwell, Thomas said slowly, I understand your concerns, but this isn't something I can simply walk away from. The implications are too significant. Hardened, Joseph's expression. I thought you might say that. Into his pocket, he reached and withdrew a small amber-colored vial. Do you know what this is, Mr. Reed? At the vial, Thomas stared. The elixir. Joseph nodded. One of the last doses my father ever made. I've kept it all these years, though I've never been tempted to give it to anyone else. On the table between them, he placed the vial. Take it. What? Thomas blinked in confusion. Take it, Joseph repeated. If you truly believe the world should have this knowledge, then you should be willing to live with the consequences yourself. Take the elixir. Experience what we've experienced. Then decide if humanity is ready for such a gift. From the vial to Joseph's face, Thomas looked, searching for signs of deception. How do I know what's in there? It could be anything. Sighed Eleanor. Why would we poison you, Mr. Reed? If we wished you harm, we would never have invited you into our home, told you our story. Then why offer it to me at all? Because you need to understand, Joseph said earnestly. Not just intellectually, but viscerally. Words cannot convey what it means to live as we do. You must experience it yourself. At the vial, Thomas stared, its contents catching the late afternoon sunlight. The liquid inside was thick and dark, almost like molasses. The temptation was undeniable. To never age, to potentially live for centuries. What if I take it, he said slowly, and still decide to write the story? Then at least you'll have made an informed decision, Joseph replied. And you'll have to live with the chaos that follows. Not for a normal human lifespan, but potentially for centuries. Open, the screen door creaked and the Caldwell children filed back into the kitchen. They fell silent when they saw the vial on the table. Pa, Samuel said, his voice sharp with concern. It's all right, son, Joseph assured him. Mr. Reed and I are just having a discussion about choices and consequences. To Thomas, Samuel's gaze shifted, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Despite his youthful appearance, there was something ancient in that gaze, something that had seen far more than a 12-year-old boy should have seen. Up the vial, Thomas picked, rolling it between his fingers. The glass was warm to the touch, as if the liquid inside generated its own heat. If I take this, he said, how soon would I notice effects? Gradual is the prevention of aging, Joseph explained. You wouldn't notice anything immediately, but the other effect is instantaneous. What other effect? Clarity, Eleanor said. A heightened awareness of time's passage. My father-in-law called it the long view. The ability to see beyond the immediate moment, to perceive the broader sweep of history. Almost mystical it sounded, but Thomas was too captivated by the possibility to dismiss it. And there are no side effects. No drawbacks besides the emotional toll you mentioned. Killed, we can still be, Joseph said bluntly. Disease, injury, they affect us as they would anyone else. The elixir preserves youth. It doesn't grant invulnerability. Uncorked, Thomas the vial, the faint scent of herbs and something metallic reaching his nostrils. He had come to Hollow Creek looking for a story and found something far more profound, a moral quandary disguised as a miracle. If he drank the elixir, he would be binding himself to secrecy more effectively than any promise could. If he refused, he would be walking away from the story of a lifetime. To think, I need, he said, recorking the vial and slipping it into his pocket. This isn't a decision to make lightly. Nodded, Joseph. A wise choice, Mr. Reed. Few in your position would hesitate. For supper, you'll stay, Eleanor said. It wasn't a question. It's nearly ready, and you've come a long way. At his watch, Thomas glanced, surprised to find that it was already past 6 o'clock. The conversation had lasted longer than he'd realized. Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell. That's very kind. Surreal in its normality was the meal that followed. Fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, and cornbread Eleanor served. A typical Kentucky supper. The children, despite their actual ages, behaved like the children they appeared to be, bickering over the last piece of chicken and asking to be excused to play before dark. Of the farm, Joseph spoke of the tobacco crop and the price of feed, as if he were any other farmer rather than a century-old man who had witnessed the transformation of America from an agricultural society to an industrial superpower. As twilight deepened outside the windows, Thomas found himself relaxing despite the weight of the vial in his pocket. Something peaceful there was about the Caldwell home, something that transcended the incredible secret it contained. After dinner, Onto the porch for a smoke, Joseph invited Thomas. The night air was cooler now, a welcome relief from the day's heat. In the yard, fireflies blinked, and somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called. "Those oak trees, my father planted," Joseph said, gesturing with his pipe toward the massive trees that lined the drive. "Saplings they were when I was a boy. Now look at them." From saplings to giants, Thomas tried to imagine watching trees grow, living long enough to see forests mature and landscapes transform. "Strange it must be," he said, "watching the world change while you remain the same." Softly, Joseph chuckled. "Oh, we change, Mr. Reed. Not physically, perhaps, but in here." With the stem of his pipe, he tapped his temple. "The mind continues to grow, to adapt. You either evolve with the times or you become a relic, regardless of how young you look." "And the children, how do they cope with, well, with not being children?" "Samba," Joseph's expression grew. "The hardest part, that's. Samuel and James have lived through it before, the transition from being treated as children to accepting their adult minds. Margaret is just beginning to understand what makes her different. Not easy it is for any of them." "Others, have there been?" Thomas asked. "Other families like yours, I mean." A long draw on his pipe Joseph took before answering. "My father believed he wasn't the first to discover the principle behind the elixir. He found references in ancient texts, Egyptian, Chinese, even Native American, to substances that prolonged youth. Whether any succeeded as his did, I cannot say. For a while, they smoked in silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The vial in his pocket, Thomas felt. A small but significant weight. "Tonight, you don't have to decide," Joseph said eventually. "With you when you go, take the elixir. Think on it. But remember, once taken, it cannot be undone." Nodded, Thomas. Though in truth, his decision was already forming. The story that had brought him to Hollow Creek was indeed extraordinary, perhaps the most important discovery in medical history. But the Caldwells' fears were not unfounded. In a world still reeling from the devastation of World War II, still grappling with the terrible power of atomic weapons, could humanity be trusted with the power to extend life indefinitely? "Going, I should be," Thomas said, rising from his chair. "A long drive back to Louisville it is." "Stood as well," Joseph, extending his hand. "Whatever you decide, Mr. Reed, I hope you'll remember that we're not just a story. We're people trying to live our lives as best we can under unusual circumstances." The offered hand, Thomas shook, struck by the strength in Joseph's grip. "I understand, Mr. Caldwell. More than you might think." In the doorway, Eleanor appeared. "Leaving so soon?" "It's getting dark." "For the night, you're welcome to stay." "Thank you, but I should get back," Thomas replied. "Tomorrow, my editor is expecting me." Nodded she, though her eyes betrayed her concern. "On those mountain roads after dark, be careful. And Mr. Reed," she hesitated, "remember that knowledge once shared cannot be reclaimed." Behind her, the children appeared, lining up to say goodbye with a formality that seemed at odds with their youthful appearances. "Will you come back, Mr. Reed?" Margaret asked, her voice small but clear. At her, Thomas smiled, wondering how it felt to be a 21-year-old woman trapped in the body of a 6-year-old girl. "Perhaps I will, Margaret. Would you like that?" Solemnly, she nodded. "I would. Many visitors, we don't get." "Then I'll do my best," he promised. Though he wasn't sure if it was a promise he could keep. As Thomas drove away from the Caldwell farm, the headlights of his Ford cutting through the darkness, he found himself looking at the world with new eyes. On the passenger seat beside him, the vial sat, its contents gleaming faintly in the dashboard light. The elixir, the key to extended youth, possibly even a form of immortality. Staggering was the ethical dilemma it presented. If he wrote his story, exposed the Caldwell secret to the world, he would be opening a Pandora's box that could never be closed again. For control of the elixir, governments would fight. The wealthy would hoard. Along new lines, society itself might fracture, the ageless versus the mortal. Yet to keep such knowledge hidden seemed equally wrong. What of the countless lives that might be improved or extended? What of the suffering that might be prevented? By the time Thomas reached the main road, his decision was made. Over, he pulled, cut the engine, and sat in the darkness for a long moment. Then he uncorked the vial. Bitter was the liquid inside, with an aftertaste of something he couldn't identify, something ancient and earthy. In one swallow, he drank it all, then sat waiting, wondering if he would feel any different. At first, there was nothing. Then, gradually, a strange clarity seemed to settle over his thoughts. A physical sensation. It wasn't so much as a shift in perspective. The pressing concerns that had occupied his mind, his career, his reputation, the story he had come to find, suddenly seemed small and fleeting against the vast backdrop of time. Again, Thomas started the car and continued toward Louisville, his mind racing with possibilities. The story he would not write, not as he had intended, at least. Too great was the risk to the Caldwells, and too unpredictable the potential consequences for humanity. But perhaps another way there was to share this discovery, to explore its implications without exposing the Caldwell family. Perhaps with time, and time was now a resource he would have in abundance, he could find a middle path between secrecy and revelation. As the lights of Louisville appeared on the horizon, a silent promise to the family he had left behind in Hollow Creek, Thomas Reed made. Their secret he would protect, but he would not let the knowledge die with them. Somehow he would find a way to use what he had learned for the benefit of humanity without unleashing the chaos that Joseph Caldwell feared. A delicate balance it would be, a task that might take decades or even centuries to complete. But then, for the first time in his life, all the time in the world, Thomas Reed had. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, a peculiar package was received by Dr. Martin Hargrove of the University of Kentucky Medical School. Inside was a journal filled with notes on theoretical life extension, cellular regeneration, and aging prevention, all presented as hypothetical rather than proven science. No return address there was, only a note that read, "For when humanity is ready." Not yet, but someday. The journal Dr. Hargrove scanned with initial skepticism that quickly gave way to fascination. Revolutionary were the theories presented, decades ahead of current medical understanding. Yet incomplete they were, tantalizingly close to a breakthrough, but missing key components that would make practical application possible. Weeks he spent studying the journal, eventually bringing it to the attention of colleagues. Soon, a small team had formed to investigate the theories, publishing papers that would lay the groundwork for entirely new fields of medical research. The journal's source, none of them ever discovered, though some noted the Louisville postmark, nor did they connect it to the young journalist Thomas Reed, who had abruptly resigned from the Courier-Journal that same autumn, citing a desire to explore broader horizons. From Kentucky himself, Reed had vanished, leaving no forwarding address. West he had moved, rumors suggested, perhaps to California or Oregon. Years later, a few people claimed to have seen him, looking remarkably youthful for his age, but such sightings were dismissed as cases of mistaken identity. In Hollow Creek, their quiet existence, the Caldwell family continued, tending their farm and keeping to themselves. From distant cities, occasionally a package would arrive, books for the children, seeds for Joseph's garden, fabric for Eleanor's sewing. Never a letter was enclosed, never a return address, but they knew who sent them. And sometimes on still summer nights when the fireflies danced in the yard and the whippoorwill called from the trees, on his porch Joseph Caldwell would sit and raise his pipe in silent salute to the journalist who had kept his word. The years passed. To generations, decades turned. Around the Caldwell farm, the world changed. But constant the family remained, moving occasionally as suspicions arose, always returning when memories had faded. Advanced, medical science did, spurred in part by the mysterious journal that had appeared in 1947. By the early 21st century, significantly researchers had extended human lifespan, though true agelessness remained elusive. The key components missing from the journal's formulas continued to baffle the scientific community. And in a small coastal town in Oregon, a man who appeared to be in his early 30s operated an antiquarian bookshop. Simply but comfortably he lived, his shelves filled with first editions and historical texts spanning centuries. As a reclusive scholar with an uncanny knowledge of history, locals knew him. About past events, someone who spoke as if he had witnessed them personally. That he never seemed to age, few noticed. That decade after decade his face remained unmarked by time, few noticed. Their observations dismissed as impossible, those who did notice eventually died or moved away. Meticulous journals the bookseller kept, recording the sweep of history as he witnessed it. And every few years, he would distill his observations into anonymous papers submitted to medical and scientific journals around the world. Papers that nudged humanity closer to understanding aging without quite revealing the final secret. A delicate balance it was, this dance between revelation and concealment. But Patience Thomas Reed had learned from the Caldwells. He could wait until humanity was ready for the gift and burden of extended life. And in the meantime, he watched and wrote and remembered the family in Hollow Creek who had trusted a young journalist with the secret of the ages. As local folklore in eastern Kentucky, the mystery of the Caldwell family and their apparent agelessness persisted. Occasionally, ambitious reporters or curious scientists would venture into Hollow Creek, seeking the family that time forgot, but only abandoned farmhouses and suspicious locals who claimed no knowledge of any Caldwells they found. Hidden in plain sight, the truth remained, preserved in the memories of those who had drunk from the amber vial and in the pages of journals scattered across the country, fragments of a secret too profound to share, but too important to lose. And somewhere, perhaps in Kentucky or Oregon or some other quiet corner of America, the descendants of Jeremiah Caldwell's work lived on, watching the slow march of time with eyes that had seen more history than any textbook could contain, waiting for the day when humanity would be wise enough to accept the gift they had been given. In the archives of the Kentucky Historical Society, a photograph from 1947 shows a farmhouse surrounded by oak trees with a family of 5 standing on the porch. By shadow, their faces are partially obscured, their identities lost to time. But if one looks closely at the corner of the image, a 6th figure can be seen, a young man with a camera around his neck. Between wonder and resolve, his expression is caught. The caption reads simply, "Unidentified family, Hollow Creek, Kentucky, 1947. Photographer unknown." Just beyond the reach of history, some secrets, it seems, are destined to remain, whispered about but never fully revealed, influencing the future in ways that even those who keep them cannot fully comprehend. And perhaps that is as it should be.